not the person interviewing Renetta. So this is just such a thrill for me. She has been recognized as one of the leading innovators and most influential executives in the advertising, marketing, and media industries, with a global reputation for not only building brands, but also the organizations and leadership to sustain them. I'm sure she will no doubt go into her career in more detail, but at a high level, she started her career at Leo Burnett, then grew to becoming the CEO of Starcom Media Vest Group Worldwide. After roughly 10 years there, she went back to Leo Burnett as Chief Talent Officer, which led her to her current role at Publicis. She's also an active member of many Chicago networks, including Chicago Community Trust, Robert and Ann Lurie Children's Hospital, and the YWCA of Metropolitan Chicago. And then lastly, I'd like to finish off the next 3 hours with a list of awards she's received. I'm kidding, I will not do that. But I would like to list a few. She was named Corporate Executive of the Year by Black Enterprise Magazine in 2002, selected Ad Woman of the Year by Chicago Advertising Association. Essence named her one of the 50 women who are changing the world, and definitely not last, but the last that I will specifically be naming. She received a Matrix Award from New York Women in Communications in 2006. So, needless to say, it is an absolute honor to be asked to facilitate this discussion today, and I know we're all going to gain a lot of nuggets of wisdom and get some learning from this conversation. So, without further ado, Renetta, are we ready for some questions?
We are, and Annie, thank you for minimizing the embarrassment or whatever that is. And then hi to all my friends. I see you popping up in the chat. So thank you for being here today.
I truly had to pick from like a whole list of awards. I was like, all right, which one of the 500 am I going to highlight here? So impressive.
Thank you.
All right. So first off, I just gave a pretty high level overview of your career, but I would love if you could provide us with a snapshot of your journey to where you are today. Pivotal moments, influential mentors, really anything that's shaped the trajectory of your professional life.
Okay, great. So as I now like to say, I've been in the industry. I'm coming up on my 40th year of service. So I have 40 years of stuff, right, to talk about. But Annie, I won't cover all of that. What I will say, and I think it's material, is I'm a girl from the South Side of Chicago. I grew up during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And importantly, I consider myself to be, I call myself a baby of the Brown v. Board of Education court decision. And part of that was for Black Americans that access to education, our responsibility was to go forth and receive educations that would allow us to go bring excellence in the world and make change. And I think all of that was infused in me. So we have that moment in time, that perspective around education and excellence. The other thing I will say is I grew up on, as I said, on the South Side of Chicago, and I spent most of my formative years in South Shore. And I went to parochial schools. I'm Catholic by faith and went to parochial schools. And one of the things that, and I tell this story frequently, but I used to play with my classmates on Saturday mornings. We would go to the churchyard and play on a piece of grass. And then along about 12:30, 1 o'clock, we would depart to this ice cream store that was on East 71st Street. And then sometime by about 1:32, my friends would get up and leave, and they would say, sorry, we've got to go now because we're meeting our families, our siblings, whatever, over at the South Shore Country Club. And at that time, the South Shore Country Club did not let Blacks in as members. It didn't let people who were Jewish in as members. And in fact, sometime in the 1970s, the South Shore Country Club decided that it would close rather than expand its membership. And so I use that one as a pinpoint because I think for the period of time that I grew up, I ended up experiencing exclusion, and that exclusion was often because of my race, if you will. And I think that just, I think that had a formative effect on me, right? When you end up being excluded. So I wasn't invited to very many birthday parties when I was in grammar school because there were probably only 3 or 4 Blacks, and you just didn't do that. So I understand what happens when you're excluded. But by the same token, I grew up in a period where what I would call is the energy of possibility was there as well, right? So what is possible based on what kind of education I got, what was possible in terms of career choices. And so I think I have spent a meaningful part of my life going in between this dynamic of exclusion and possibility, right? And so I go up north. So I go into Evanston for college. I'm going to be a lawyer. I decide not to be a lawyer, but I'm in love with what I call the persuasive arts, and end up working my way into the world of advertising. And so I did start at the Leo Burnett Company in the summer of 1978, and I was destined to go into what's called client services back then, and it's the client handling side of it. But I ended up deciding to stay in the media discipline, and that's where I built the next 30 years of my career. But the moment I decided to pick media as the discipline that I was going to attach myself to, I became the first Black person and the first Black woman to be on the professional track in media in that department. And so once again, I find myself in a position of there aren't many people like me doing it. In fact, in that particular location at that point in time, I'm the only one doing that. There were other Blacks in the department, but none who had declared that they wanted to be on the progression up to media director at that time. And so once again, I find myself toggling between this exclusiveness, meaning I'm the only one, but the possibility of what happens, what can I create? What does it demand of me? What possibilities, can I create for others who come behind me? So I just keep ending up in this sort of push-pull between those two dynamics. The other thing I'll say is the world I started my career in is way different than the world we're in right now, right? So it wasn't clear that women could have children and still have a professional career. It wasn't clear then, right? So there were other things that we were managing. And this whole conversation around mentors, it wasn't even a conversation. I mean, I think mentoring was happening, but mentoring as a program, as a thing, as a developmental tool, it wasn't a real thing. And so for most of my career, I had to cobble together mentors, because being a person of difference, it's like, who's going to adopt you? Who's going to teach you what you need to know? And so, I became, I think, kind of artful at understanding what it was I needed to know at some point of my career, and finding people who would help me navigate that, whatever that challenge was. But it wasn't as if there was some program that was going to do it. And then eventually, what I decide to do is that I'm going to make it easier for the people behind me. And so that's why I raise my hand for mentorship. That's why I raise my hand for conversations, right? And they can be informal, whatever. But I think part of what my commitment became was making those kind of access points possible for other people. So I'll stop there. I mean, like I say, I got 40 years of stuff. So Annie, tell me what else you want to know.
No, that was wonderful. I think one thing that struck me was your point about, we're a product of the times that we grew up, and that so much informs our way of thinking and, how we view the world and where we go. So I think keeping that in mind, that we are built around what's happening at that time, is something so important to keep in mind. So thank you.
Yeah.
So clearly you've had exposure in different job functions, and of course with each job function or industry, it requires a certain skill set to be successful. So in your opinion, what is the most important skill you've acquired in your career that you believe equips you to be successful in promoting inclusion?
Okay. So I might cheat and give you two, but I'll start with one, and I'll start with the big one, right? So if we go back to the period of time in which I'm now practicing, remember, I'm I am the only Black person, right, moving through. And I think at some point it dawns on me that part of the magic of hiring, and all of us talk about this all the time, is still a conversation out there, is that the bias in hiring is that you hire people who look like you, right? And we're trying to have all these systems to eradicate that. Well, because I was the person of difference, the system didn't let me hire people like me, because the system was still kind of unclear what it was going to do with people like me or how many people like me it wanted. And so for the most part, I spent, I'd say, the vast majority of my career having to work with the people who are assigned to me. So I couldn't use that lever. I just couldn't use it. It wasn't available to me, right? But where it gets back to your question, Annie, is I still had to be successful. And I had to figure out a mechanism by which I was going to work with whoever I was given to work with, and how I could make them successful too. Because if I made them successful, then maybe they'd help make me successful. And so what I would encourage people to understand is that you don't need to hire people who look exactly like you. There is a fundamental ability to be able to see other people, see what their talents are, help them maximize their talents, expand their talents, help those individuals grow. And if you do that with an authenticity or a sincerity or a fundamental commitment to it, you're going to get really good results from it. And so at one point, and this is anecdotal, actually, because I never measured it myself, but at one point, probably in 2008 or 2009, if you looked across the ecosystem of media agency companies, so Starcom, MediaVest was one, but you looked across my competitive set, 8 of the 9 people who were CEOs of those other media companies had at some point worked either directly for me or in an organization that I had led. And so when we think about what's possible, I think we can all have that commitment to the development of others, and right. And I've continued that. And while it wasn't something that I planned to do, I mean, right, I had to do it because I wanted to be successful. I hadn't planned to do it. In hindsight, it's one of the most remarkable skills I ever developed. And I'm sorry, I have a upset puppy, so you'll hear him.
That's funny for you. No, I think your point about leading with authenticity is so key. So thank you for that. All right, maybe a couple more questions and then we'll open it up to audience. But the past year has shaped us all and made us realize so much about our current systems, what is and probably more importantly is not working, and our responsibility in how we go forward. So I'm curious, how are you thinking about developing a truly inclusive workplace culture after the reckoning of what we witnessed in 2020? 2020 for racial justice?
Yep. So one of, and I'm going to start, and it'll probably feel a little bit random, but I'm really going to connect all of these. And so one of the things that we're finding inside of Publicis Groupe, primarily here in the US, but around our global footprint, is the power of collaboration and coalitions. So working with other people and working together to advance the topic. And so we've been on a path for the last almost 10, 11 months to really interrogating and reshaping our systems and our processes and how we think about this topic. But the critical thing is it's been done by a group of dedicated diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioners, along with our business partners, along with our finance partners, along with our legal partners. And so this idea of having a coalition or a broad way of collaborating is important. We have benefited from having leadership commitment. And I think, so if you made me pick one, if I could only give you one, leadership commitment is critical, because I think in order to build the types of inclusive environments that we're talking about now in the context of 2020, 2021, is that I think we understand that we're going to have to break or dismantle something in order to have to rebuild it, right? It's not like a refinement. I mean, some things just have to be stopped and other things have to be created. And you need leaders who are willing to tolerate that breaking and reconstruction. So leadership commitment. I think part of it is having lots of conversations. So it's being able to listen to people, but it's also being able to set an environment where people can trust that they can bring their needs forward and articulate them in a way that they'll be heard and actioned. And I think it's a commitment to change. And that gets back to the break, the rebuild, et cetera. But it's more of an activist energy around change rather than, and there's some things we're changing incrementally, but there are other things that we're really saying, it really has to go this way. And it's going to make some people uncomfortable, and we're going to deal with that discomfort. So we're not trying to be oppositional about it. But look, if we're all going to come together and try to shape our internal environment this way, then we're going to have to change some things. And then I think the other part of that is, how do we invite in our clients, and how do we invite in members of the communities that sit around us? So that's how we're looking at it in a macro way. But for those of you who, I happen to love systems thinking, right? It's really engaging with the whole system around it, and that's rewarding work, but it's tough work too, because when you lean on a system, it'll lean back, and so you've got to have this move, and then you got to go, okay, that was the response. Okay, now I'm going to try this, right? So there's an iterative quality to it, and there's even a test and learn. So I think the way we practice it, there's some things that we know for sure are probably best practices that we can run and implement, but there are other things that we're sort of testing and learning our way into as another avenue for creating the kind of inclusive environments that we want.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's such a dynamic process, and those of us that go into it thinking it's going to be a one size fits all solution and it's going to be great, and don't expect that backlash that we are inevitably going to receive, is when we fall short or we stop altogether. So going into whatever process with an understanding that it's not going to be easy, and we're going to face backlash from all sides is so critical. So thank you.
Yep. And sometimes I describe, in fact, I was on a call with some of our team members today, and I said, certain moments in time, usually daily, we're really acting as diplomats, right? We're operating between, a rock in a hard place, or this point of view and that point of view, right? So, we talk about change, but it's also through this lens of diplomacy and connection and progress, right? As opposed to other lenses that we could adopt.
Absolutely. Very, very good point. All right. Well, we are coming up to the audience section, but I have one last question for you.
Okay.
So I know for those of us on the call in our earlier stages of our career, one thing I think we can all identify with is the big question of what are we going to accomplish? What kind of impact are we going to have? And how are we going to get there? It's a very daunting thing. I know I can speak for myself. But I do think that everyone, no matter what stage in their career, is grappling with these types of questions. So you have obviously accomplished a great deal in your life. How will you define success at the close of your career?
Wow. Wow.
Like a tiny question, really simple.
Yeah, it's just a tiny question. So here's part of it. Oh, geez, I'm just trying to organize my thoughts in the best manner I can. So one, I as an individual, I don't worry about legacy per se, if only because I think your legacy really is set by others. Legacy is a reputational kind of thing. So I kind of focus on other parts. The other thing that I would tell you all as listeners is that there are multiple or layers of definitions or facets to success. So one area of success that I've had is maybe about a month ago, I get these often enough, not every month, but a month ago, there was an individual leaving our firm. And before they left, they wrote me a note and said, here are the 3 ways in which you changed my life. And this is someone who didn't work for me directly all the time. And I hadn't been in contact directly with for maybe 5 or 6 years, but right. So one element of success that I would tell all of you to look for is in those very specific moments, how you're making something possible for someone else. Another avenue of success. So back in the late 90s, I was still in media. I was still a practitioner of media, and my discipline was magazines. And so I negotiated for magazines with on behalf of my clients. And so probably sometime in 1996, I structured a deal with a major publishing house of how we were going to manage the relationship and manage the spending. So anyway, fast forward, I go do other things. I become a CEO. I leave the industry. I come back. And when I come back in 2012, I run into one of the principals from that publishing house. And they were still using the negotiation structure that I had built in like 1996 or 97. So another element of success is having your work continue on, right? Building things that are sustainable, building things that are adaptable. And then to get more directly at the question you asked me, Annie, is I'm in the camp, and we can go, everybody can go look this word up, but right, I'm in the camp of this notion of generativity, which is right now I have, all this work and life experience behind me, and I'm still trying to figure out how I can contribute using all of that learning to help advance something, right? So I'm not thinking necessarily about stopping, but I'm thinking about what's the definition of what's possible now, how I can aggregate sort of everything I've learned and continue to put it out into the world. And I'm not going to be putting it out in the world in the ways I did when I was 40 or even 50, but I think that I still have that responsibility to create what's possible, right? And so as I jokingly like to say, I do consider myself a Jedi, and I think right now I have the best control of my lightsaber ever, right? But that also means, I don't have to use it very often, but when I'm using it, I think I have the best use of it. And so what I would call to is those of you who are younger in your career, figure out how you can build it in a way where you can keep contributing over time. And to, colleagues on this call who are probably in the same position as I am, hey, let's reimagine, where we can apply ourselves. Because as best I can tell, the world still has lots of issues it's trying to sort through. And there are people with great ideas and people with great ideas of all ages and stages. And so success for me is really trying to figure out at this age, this stage, this context, how I can continue to support progress and possibility.
That is the best metaphor I've ever heard, is the light Jedi.
You can use that. And I'm usually the queen of bad metaphors. I mean,
no, wow.
Mine are inelegant metaphors. People always know what I'm talking about, but they're like, well, how'd you put that together? But anyway, so thank you, Annie. Thank you.
Very impressed. Very impressed. Well, that was really, really inspiring. I know I took so much away from what you said. And I think I can speak for everyone here that they did as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you
for allowing me to be your interviewee or interviewer. Yes. Well, Emily and Seth, I think it might be time for the audience section. We can open it up to anything that has been sent in the chat.
Perfect. Well, I will say that this is the most active chat box I have seen in all of our Power Chat sessions so far in terms of questions just pouring in. So I apologize to the audience. We won't be able to get to everyone, but I am going to go ahead and spotlight Shalane Walker right now to ask her question.
All right. I know Shalane. That's
we
okay.
go way back. But yes, so my question was specifically on what you were speaking about and the importance of giving back, the importance of making things that last beyond you, and also the importance of, knocking down walls and creating the spaces if they're not there yet. How do you, either in your typical day or typical week, allocate your time for those things? I feel like a lot of times we kind of get caught up in our day-to-day work, which is really important. But then it's also important that we're making time to give back, important to others, but then also making time to develop and have time to think through these long-term ideas and processes. And so I was curious, how do you fit it all in?
Okay. I'm not sure I still do. So I'll be honest about that, Shalane. I'm not sure I fit it all in. If I think about it, there's sort of active periods and I don't want to call it active and inactive. So let's say with others and when I'm by myself, right? So when I'm with others, I'm really attuned to giving people room for voice. And part of that is because I'm still working, whatever. And because I'm the old sage, everybody go, well, we'll wait for her to give the answer. And I'm like, no. I've got to invite in the other answers, right? Because that's also how we support people, right? Part of helping others make change is giving them the voice or the ability to what they call agenda set or articulate dissent, if you will. And what I try to do is stand behind them and say, you're safe, I've got you. If something bad happens, I'll rush in. But it's sort of building that coalition of people behind. And then the things that I do when I'm when I'm alone is I try to get food for thought. So I try to get different people in my ear. And right now, a couple of the places where I'm going is, and both are associated with the New York Times. So, and I'm not promoting anything, but Kara Swisher Sway, just listening to her talk about technology and changes, that's fascinating. But also recently, Ezra Klein, who also has a podcast on the New York Times, has just had some fascinating interviews. And for anybody who wants to hear one that's pure gold, listen to him in conversation with Tressie McMillan Cottom, who is a Black woman professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She's a sociologist. That is 83 Minutes of Magic. And then also on New York Times, there's Wesley, and I forget her name, but two Black culture reporters who talk about culture, et cetera. So I'm trying to put different people in my ear so that I can think about the topic of inclusion or whatever I want to think about through somebody else's frame. So I give people room to express their frame, and I try to hear other frames, and then I don't know, the rest of it, Shalane, I just make it up. Sometimes I'm knitting, sometimes I'm a devoted Animal Crossing New Horizon player. So sometimes I'm just on my island. I'm like, I got to go to my island. My husband thinks I'm crazy, but I'm like, I'm on my island, leave me alone. And I'm just at the dining room table. So yeah.
I love
That's
it.
it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Nice to see you again.
You as well.
Oh,
All
yay,
right.
Chris. We might have to change. We exchange island codes.
I love it. All right, we will come now to Deanna for her questions. So I'll add a spotlight here. Deanna.
Deanna, long time.
No, hi Renetta. Hope everything is well. Thank you for all that you've done for Black folks in the industry, young people like myself included. So just thank you for
You're
all the
welcome.
wisdoms and every door that you've opened for us. My question is about imposter syndrome. As you grow, at least for myself, specifically with funders and in the philanthropy world, how do you overcome that? How do you, stand tall and put yourself in those positions and not feel like you don't belong because others like you aren't there? So just how have you been able to overcome that, being one of the only women of color in so many rooms, I'm sure?
Yeah. Okay, so Deanna, we're just going to have to continue parts of this conversation, and maybe I just have to have a separate chat because I take great issue with imposter syndrome, and here's why, and here's what I'll say, and then I will come back and answer your question. Throughout my career, I have found I've probably wandered in and out of several syndromes. Right? So at a point in time, there's another syndrome out there called hubris, which is almost Icarus and his wax wings, thinking he can fly very, very close to the sun. That's also a syndrome. And I've had that. So what I want to say is that to all of you is be careful of what labels you put on yourself. The world applies, let me tell you, the world applies enough labels to Black women that I'm not sure we need to apply one more ourselves, but I understand it's a human habit. So be careful about which labels you apply to yourself, because that becomes a way in which we limit ourselves, right? So just hold that. And then what I'll say related to imposter syndrome specifically is just remember, sometimes you're going to be in a room you've never been in, and you're going to get all sorts of feelings. And that feeling isn't that you're an imposter. It's just the feeling of being in a room you've never been in before. And I used to do that a lot. And what I would say is, if you can, catch yourself for like 10 seconds and say, okay, what do I need to learn in this room? How do I want to show up in this room? And then the third thing I tell you, depending on what you believe about whatever you believe, if you're in that room, you're supposed to be in that room. Now, you may be the only one who looks like you in that room, but you're supposed to be in that room, right? Then the last thing I'll say, and hold on, I'm gonna go off camera for like 10 seconds. I would encourage anybody, and you don't have to, but Adam Grant just wrote this new book called Think Again. And he has one of the better discussions of imposter syndrome that I have seen. So see if you can Google it, see if you can find it, go to the library and find it. Because what he says is that what you're trying to negotiate is really your confidence versus your competence at any point in time. And if you understand, even if you go find his framework, right? Next time you're in a room, even if you go, okay, why is my confidence low? Can I raise that? Where is my competence in this? And how do I navigate it? So it's not that it's, my fear is that people keep labeling themselves and making it a bad thing. And in fact, you can turn it, whatever that feeling is or the impression, you can turn it into a learning moment of what else do I need in this moment in order for me to perform the way I want to perform, or how I want to show up the way I want to show up, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And let's catch up otherwise. So send me a note. You know where I am. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, Deanna.
Thanks, Renetta. Renetta knows everyone here on this Zoom call. So I swear I'm just picking folks who have asked questions, but they're all friends of Renetta. So I love it. So we have time for just one more question. Amber Townsend, are you still on and are you able to come off video so we can spotlight you?
Yeah, I'm actually having some technical difficulties. I'm been spending the past 10 minutes trying to get on video right now.
Feel free to just ask over mic. That's totally fine.
Yep.
Yeah. So first I just want to say I appreciate just your level of authenticity here, and like the fact that you were willing to go there with a lot of these questions, and not just, talk about it like on a surface level. So let's see. So my question is, so we all know that a lot of the expectations around professionalism and what that means in the workplace are rooted in racially biased assumptions and expectations. So can you talk about how you've navigated spaces or instances where you've had to balance expectations of professionalism with leading authentically, and how you've ensured that you weren't compromising those parts of your identity that are important to you?
Okay, so Amber, thanks for the question. Here's my sort of list. The conversation around dominant culture or white culture values is a relatively recent one. We can pick a time, but I'll pick 5 years. It's probably more than 5 years. Maybe it's 10 years. But even if it's 10 years, the first 75% of my career, those things weren't applicable, right? So I don't know that I actually navigated them that well. And in fact, what I would say to you is I probably didn't early on, because coming out of my generation, my job was to go into corporate America and to some degree fit in so that I could do some of the work that I did, right? And so so I guess what I'm trying to acknowledge is at points in time, I probably did adopt some of those values, right? What I would say to you, though, is the authenticity comes from each of us has a set of values, and each of us has, I think, or most of us have a set of things that we're trying to assert for the world or put into the world. And some of the things that I kept going on was, for instance, I had I was almost stubborn, mulishly stubborn around, I wanted to make sure that more Black and brown people could follow behind me. And I did, that was so very important to me that I always did that. So even if I might have been practicing perfectionism, I had a commitment to bringing others along, to leading as a Black woman, to showing up as a Black woman in a certain way, that I was so committed to that I never compromised that. And so I think the answer I'm coming to, Amber, is I had to balance both, but it's not because I was able to avoid one of them. It's just that both were present and I kept emphasizing the one that would drive hardest and best for the outcome that I thought needed to be there, if that makes sense to you. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's tricky. And I think this generation and your generation has more flexibility in that because you can call it out. Right? But we didn't have the language or perspective, for the first early parts of my career, or maybe even the permission or the foresight to call those things out. And some of those things are going to be true in your generation. So know what you're rooted in, know what is exceptionally important to you for the advancement of your gender or your sexual orientation or whatever part of your identity is really important to you, and keep plowing ahead on that one. And then if you get caught in the revolving door of some of that other stuff, because it's hard not to understand, give yourself grace, give yourself permission, and then spin out of that, whatever cycle it is, as fast as you can, because you've got to get back to this other work. All right.
Well, thank you. I think it's time to break out into small groups, but on behalf of everyone on this call, thank you so much for your time,
Welcome.
your wisdom, everything. It was incredible. Like Amber said, thank you for going there, because it's easy not to go there, but sharing that vulnerability makes us all feel more connected and learn more. So thank you so much.
All right. And then one more. Hey, Sheila Owens. Okay. Sorry. I just had to call Sheila out.
Are you sure that's the only other person you know?
No. Well,